Yes, sorry, couldn't
Hi.
see you. So, an approach to board game design that centers allyship and empowers trans people.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jori Linnamäki and I'm a PhD student at Tampere University, and my professional background is in psychodrama therapy, theater and education, and apart from game design and games research. And this is a project I've had the great privilege of working with Josephine and some others. We will mention them, but Josephine, do you want to say something about yourself before we move into the slides?
No, I'm good. I think I guess I'm working on the game design with Yuri, but yes, you're covering it. You're good. Go for it.
Okay, great. Josephine has her own presentation later on today, so we decided I take the main part of this. Okay, yes. So the project that we were working on started with a cooperation between the Neuroscience Department and the Games and Society Lab, and it was supposed to support adolescent trans people before transition who have limited resources in Sweden, Sweden is kind of pretty progressive country in terms of trans rights, but that tells us where we are with trans rights at the moment. The project changed very much during the process. It started with me and Doris, Doris Rus and Fotis Papadoulos started the project and recruited me. And here we are, three cis people trying to make the world better for trans people, and with this huge energy, but really a lack of knowledge and lack of understanding what somehow all is involved in this kind of game design. But luckily, we had many threshold moments where we needed to really reflect on us. And this project has, for me, for example, been a big journey as an ally. I always thought of myself as a very good ally because I love everyone, so I must be a good ally. And this project has opened my eyes to many forms of privilege that I wasn't aware of, and also many things that I have never considered and been aware of the trans experience. And I consider myself now a much stronger ally to the movement, and it somehow has brought meaning to my life. Going to the project. So because we had so many threshold moments where we needed to reflect, we thought that we could write an autoethnographic article about our process and our reflections on our team's power dynamics and everything that is somehow involved in this kind of game design. First, the game was supposed to be an educational live action role-playing game where you could explore identity, and later on it became a board game, partly because of COVID. And it's pretty hard to run LARP tests during COVID time. And this presentation is about it. These were pretty much the questions we were trying to answer. First, in the first version of the game, it was an identity exploration game, but in the second version, we decided that we go for the allyship, and we try to teach allies skills that they can help the trans people in their network with, and the support networks of trans people. And we came up with this concept where the board, where the players are playing allies, but somehow we wanted to know how it won't be disempowering for trans people if allies are playing allies, which is it was a pretty big question in our design. And how do we make the design process ethical, and what skills do allies actually need to be good allies? And our team dynamics was not a very simple thing either. In our final team, we had Josephine, Sabine, Doris and Emily, and Doris was everyone's superior and the producer of the project. And it started with us as cis people working at the project to create a game for trans people. And then Linnamäki, Rodin and Baird were hired by Doris to work in this project, so she was our boss. And later also Sabine started working at the Games and Society Lab and became became a consultant in this project, both with, mostly with the game design. And my background comes from therapy and game design, but I had no expertise on trans issues. And Rodin is a game designer and a trans person, and she was the sole expert on trans issues in the beginning of the project. And you can imagine what the emotional labor is when she's trying to put her experience there into the game and into the dynamics, and at the same time somehow represent all trans experience, which of course is impossible. And she's also a master level student at Uppsala, and Doris is her teacher, and I guess Sabine now too. So that doesn't make the team dynamics any more simple. And she's also the lead designer of the game at the moment. And Josephine is a game designer and trans person who came from outside to this project, and we realized that we really need to release some burden, but also now she is working more and is more involved in the Games and Society Lab. And yeah, I think this became pretty clear that the complicated setting created much emotional labor. And we had some threshold moments which led us to this reflecting and to this process of trying to figure out, because this is a minefield, this like in the sense that if you are trying to do something for a group that you're not part of, there's so many things that you are not aware of. And this became very clear when we held the first workshop. We had informants at Uppsala University, and we realized we cannot do a game only cis people for trans people. And we had the luck of Doris knowing Emily, who is a brilliant game designer and also was a master's level student there. And then we had someone who understands more of the subject matter in the team. But then we ran the first workshop, and then we realized, okay, Emily is feeling different than us. She's feeling very heavy, and she had to pour her like heart into the like both lecturing us about the experience and also like being the subject matter expert on the team. And it made her role as the designer also much heavier, like what and also this question, why was she hired to the team, weighed on her. And we realized that, okay, we need to change this structure of the game, and we need to really become aware of this process and somehow how aware of we are as allies of all the things that we are now actually working with. And when we made the first version of the board game where allies defend trans people, we had some opposing views during that time, and Josephine was not yet part of the team, and we kind of like had this question, like, how do we evaluate now our opinions? How is this deep understanding of the lived experience evaluated against, for example, my psychodrama therapist experience when we are talking about emotional content, where we both probably have something to contribute? And we discussed this pretty much in the article, which is at its final phases. We are doing the final edits, and hopefully we will be able to submit it soon. And also we realized that recruiting Josephine was a really good thing, and it has helped this project very much. Now to Josephine, you are more involved in the game design at the moment.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I feel wonderful. I all these compliments that I now have to react to. Hi, yes. I was brought into this process rather late, and my job right now is to talk about the game, but I'm really enjoying how Jori is talking about the reflective process that the project itself kind of became. It started off one place and has ended up somewhere completely different, and it became a much stronger discussion about the actual ethics of representation, the ethics of game design, who has power and over whom, and who can actually speak up, and who's doing all that labor. So I was very glad to be able to be brought into this process where at first, of course, because I'm being brought in and I'm external, I was quite nervous, like, okay, how much can I actually say? And it turned out that we were at the beginnings of this conversation, which actually ended up changing the board game into what it is now, which is reflective of the process of making the game itself. So it becomes really referential. It's sort of like almost an Ouroboros snake eating its own tail at this point, just going round and round. But yes, the question became, well, trans people don't have a lot of resources when they're young, especially, but in general. So making a game about resources, well, who are those resources? What are those resources? Well, supposed people who think of themselves as allies. During our own discussions, we found out, well, allyship can be difficult. It can be something that you think you have but don't have. What is allyship really? Is ally even a good word per se for what we're looking for? Is accomplice a better word, because we want you to implicate yourself in actually helping rather than simply being someone who is there sometimes and not others? So all of these things are being considered in a board game, which of course is incredibly complicated. And especially when some of the designers are now trans themselves, we had to discuss, what is the emotional labor of doing this? Is it even something that we should be doing? Probably because we have the quote lived experience. What is lived experience anyway? That's a really complicated notion and something that's been thrown around in game design for some time now. And that's sort of where we ended up with, like, we're questioning a lot of things. We ended up writing about those questions, and that's now being fed into the game design itself. So at the moment, the game is at a stage where it is a board game designed for people who are allies or wish to be allies, people who are there for trans people but don't really know what they're doing, and they are keen but perhaps not with the knowledge basis that they want. So there are different scenarios for them to play through with different resources that are available that are there to sort of encourage them to reflect on their actions, what education they can do for their own selves, what that would do for a potential trans person in a situation that's tricky. Trying to model microtransactions is really hard. So that's where we're at the moment. The game is somewhat in a prototype phase, but right now what I'm really also enjoying is being able to reflect on that process with Jori, who I'll throw back to now. So there we go. I hope I covered everything.
Thank you. Yes. And now at the end of this presentation, I will present you the model that we created during this research. We run into it at pretty early phases, a model from counseling from Frame and Williams, which was based on a counseling situation where the different cultural context provided like a question of what the counselor should do. And it turned out that this particular model, we have edited it a bit, but it was very helpful for us too in how to somehow go into an ethical process. So first, and there are questions helping the different steps, but kind of and we hope that this will be kind of just the first step into creating a discussion around these, and other people will hopefully contribute later on to this model. But the steps are identifying and defining an ethical dilemma, then exploring the cultural power structures that you are working in, everyone in the group, seeking consultation from relevant parties, all from people with lived experience, expertise, maybe sometimes other parties that feel relevant to ask from. And in our case, we of course also co-designed and not only sought consultation from the people involved, and generating alternative solutions, selecting the course of action, and then eventually evaluating and testing the decision. And you see the helpful questions there, like that part are pretty much, most of them are from the original model. Some of them we have kind of thought that they are, especially these gameplay questions, that they are kind of still need to be considered in a game design process, not just the people involved. And these are our main findings. When designing for and with vulnerable populations, an ethical process comes through transparency, constant communication, and self-reflection. Kind of clear, but at the same time, really hard work. Like, it's really hard work to stay aware, to stay open to the idea that you might be doing something constantly wrong, to be also aware that somehow that it still is important, and not to somehow quit just because it's so difficult. That was often for me like it felt so difficult to do it right that I got very often overwhelmed and frightened. And having a different amount of emotional labor is not unethical per se, but a team must be aware of it and communicate about it to follow an ethical process. And as I said before, we hope that this model will be commented on, hopefully co-developed with like later writers or anything, and hopefully from the industry as well. I know that this was made from a project that was based on board game and live game design, but I think the same questions, the same model, the same cooperations, the same stakeholder thinking is in video game design as well. So thank you. That's my presentation part. I still have a few minutes for questions, and I guess Josephine will be here to answer too.
Great, thank you. That's an amazing talk. Okay. Yes, yes. Do I understand correctly that we will have the presentation of the game itself a little later today, right? Will we have...
Josephine is speaking about another.
Okay.
So this is about this project, and this had the game as, it was a bit of a side note, I'm sorry, but we felt that this kind of process has been the more relevant thing, and this allyship thing has been the more relevant thing to share about this game design process.
No, sure, absolutely. And I am amazed how you learn more about your respective subjects and how it was about discovering something new for all the members of the team. Probably, will there be any like online presentations or maybe videos so people could learn more about how it works?
I hope so. Like, what's the situation with the game at the moment, Josephine? Like, when do you think it will be available?
Hi. Yes, it will be eventually. We had to stall a little bit because, of course, constant COVID changes put me in. We were just at the sort of final edge of the prototype phase. We were about to test it. The goal was to seek ethical approval to do it in the Uppsala hospital, and that's still the plan. And once it's tested and that we have some ideas about how it might function, we will then, yeah, absolutely be presenting it as a game. It's, yeah, unfortunately, I literally got thrown into a teaching job immediately when someone had to go on sick leave, which was really terrible sort of last minute thing. So it meant that we had to pause the production process. But yes, we intend to carry on and absolutely be very happy to share it if people are interested.